Hi everyone, it's really great to be here with you all today speaking about one of my favourite topics, which is what is the NDIS. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land which we meet on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to express my gratitude that we share this land today, my sorrow for some of the costs of that sharing, and my hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice, and partnership together. I'd also like to recognise the importance of people with disabilities, their families and supporters, and the role they play in their communities. We acknowledge the structural inequalities that have contributed to their exclusion from social, economic and community participation, and we work toward inclusion and upholding human rights. Just in regards to the statement that you see on the screen, I'd just like to acknowledge the third and fourth points. So as discussed, I unfortunately won't be able to answer any questions today, but I will share some contact details later in the presentation to let you know how you can have those questions answered. And I also ask that you don't record any of the information that I share, but instead, again, at the end of the presentation, I will share how to get resources and about the information that I've shared. So my name is Julia Csanki, and yes, that is definitely how you spell and pronounce my last name, just in case you're wondering. I'm a local area coordinator at Carers Queensland, and at Carers Queensland we are the partner in the community to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We are going to be covering quite a few different things in this presentation today. I'm going to be covering who is helping to deliver the NDIS and an introduction to the NDIS. I will detail the eligibility criteria and what information you need to provide to support an application and how to request access to the NDIS, what happens after an access request is made, and what happens when a person is or is not accepted to be as a participant of the NDIS, how the NDIS and health systems work together, and where to find your nearest local area coordination service. So who is helping to deliver the NDIS? So first we have the National Disability Insurance Agency, also known as the NDIA, and they are the independent government organisation that runs the NDIS. Next, we have our early childhood approach partners. Early childhood approach partners are those who help children aged 0 to 6 that have a developmental delay or disability. Early childhood partners employ early childhood coordinators who help children and their family access supports and services that are tailored to the child's needs. Early childhood coordinators will also help with connection to other services such as community health groups, playgroups, or other activities in the local area. Whoops, sorry, my apologies. Last, so we have the LAC, or Local Area Coordination Partners. And local area coordination partners employ local area coordinators, people like me, who help people understand and access the NDIS. LAC partners also work with NDIS participants to develop and use their NDIS plans. For most people ages 7 and over, an LAC will be their main point of contact with the NDIS. An LAC will also connect people with disability to support services and activities and other government services in their community. LACs also work with communities to help them become more accessible and inclusive for people with disability. So, what actually is the NDIS? So, the National Disability Insurance Scheme is delivered by the National Disability Insurance Agency, as I said in the previous slide. As a scheme in itself, the NDIS can provide those Australians under the age of 65 who have a permanent and significant disability with the reasonable and necessary supports they need to live an ordinary life and achieve their goals. So these sorts of supports may include things like greater independence, community involvement, employment, or improved wellbeing. As an insurance scheme, the NDIS takes a lifetime approach, investing in people with disability early to improve their outcomes later in life. The NDIS gives Australians peace of mind that if they or their loved one or their child is born with or acquires a permanent and significant disability, they will get the support they need. However, when we talk about what is the NDIS, we can't talk about what supports the NDIS can provide without addressing the other types of supports and services available. And these other types of supports and services that are available are the ones that you see in the black rectangles. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see access mainstream services and supports. And mainstream services and supports are services available for all Australians that they can receive through people like GPs or teachers through the health and education systems. Next, in the top right-hand corner, we have access community services and supports. And these are services available to everyone in the community, such as sports groups, community groups, libraries, or charities. Next, we have support from your informal arrangements. So this is help that you get from family and friends, and it's help that you generally don't pay for, and it's generally a part of most people's lives. Then, lastly, in our bottom left-hand corner, we have receive reasonable and necessary supports. So the NDIS will pay for reasonable and necessary supports for you. This simply means that the supports provided are supports related to your disability and are required for you to live your life, achieve your goals, and are generally available to you for as long as you need to support and manage your disability. So the NDIA make decisions about who can access the NDIS based on the information they are provided from a person with disability about their disability and its impact on their day-to-day life. But there are some basic eligibility criteria, and so to fulfil that basic eligibility criteria, a person must have a permanent and significant disability that affects their ability to take part in everyday activities, be less than 65 years old when they first apply for the NDIS, be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, or hold a protected special category visa and also live in Australia. There is actually a checklist available in the Understanding the NDIS booklet and on the NDIS website, and I'll share how to find those resources in a later slide. However, just remembering that it is just a checklist and just a guide, and that the final decisions about eligibility are up to the NDIA. So, as part of an application, as I said before, a person with disability will need to provide information about themselves to help the NDIA make a decision about their eligibility for the NDIS. So they can give that information themselves, or that somebody they trust can provide that information on their behalf. So in terms of the other information that they'll need to provide is things like name, age, where a person lives, whether they have permission to live in Australia permanently, details and recent and relevant evidence about their disability and its impact on their day-to-day function, current and/or relevant medical reports already available from medical professionals or allied health professionals, and also whether you give the NDIA permission to talk to other people about you and your disability, including people like GP or your GP or Centrelink. So, as I have talked about in the last couple of slides, I have said that you'll need to provide information about how a person, or how you or the person you're supporting is impacted by their disability on a day-to-day basis. This is also known as substantially reduced functional capacity. So substantially reduced functional capacity can be demonstrated in one or more of the 6 domains that we see on the slide. It's important to note, though, that the NDIA considers both what a person can and cannot do in that domain. So first we have mobility, and mobility or moving around involves using limbs for physical activities such as standing, walking, freely getting in and out of bed or leaving the home. Next we have communication, which involves expressing wants and needs through verbal or non-verbal methods, and also understanding other people's wants and needs. Next we have social interaction, and that involves making and keeping friends, interacting in the community, and behaving within reasonable social limits. And next we have learning, and although the word implies this, it doesn't actually have to do with a person's capacity to study, rather a person's capacity to learn how to complete tasks for everyday life. It involves things like understanding and remembering information and learning and practicing new skills. Next we have self-care, so that's related, as it says, to all tasks that we do in our daily life. Feeding, grooming, our personal hygiene, and it's about a person's capacity to do those basic tasks. And then lastly, we have self-management. And self-management relates to a person's cognitive capacity to organise their own life, make decisions, problem solve, or manage money. So let's say that you or the person you're supporting have had a look at that basic eligibility criteria we talked about. Age, whether you have permission to live here or you're an Australian residency, you're an Australian citizen, that you have a permanent and significant disability that affects you in those one or more of those 6 areas that we spoke about. You might want to consider putting in an access request form or requesting access to the NDIS. So it can be done a couple of different ways. Firstly, you could actually call the NDIS on the 1-800 number you see on the screen, and you will complete what we call a verbal access request. Once you complete that verbal access request, you'll be sent some additional documentation that your most relevant treating professional will need to complete. The other way that you could do it is actually download the NDIS's access request form from the website. The access request form contains 2 sections. Section 1 is just basic information about you, and if you're being supported by somebody to fill out the application, their details as well. And then section 2 again is where your most appropriate treating professional will speak about you and your disability and how it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. So what happens after access? So when you have provided all of the necessary information, the NDIA will make a decision about whether you are eligible for the NDIS. They will actually send you a letter to confirm that decision, and that is called an access decision. So if you are eligible, you'll be contacted to arrange a planning meeting to discuss your support and funding needs. If you aren't eligible for the NDIS, you do have the right to ask for a review of that decision. However, you still can receive help from an LAC or an EC coordinator to access community supports and services. And we'll actually cover what that support can look like from an LAC in a later slide. So far, we have covered the basics of what is the NDIS and also who was helping to deliver the NDIS, the basic eligibility criteria and key information that you or the person you're supporting will need to include to request access to the NDIS, and what happens if a participant is accepted to be a participant of the scheme. As local area coordination partners in the community, we provide support to participants along the entirety of their NDIS journey. So as I said, that we can help a participant or a person with disability discover what is the NDIS, whether it might be appropriate for them to complete an application, helping them understand that eligibility criteria. And then if they become a participant, we can help them to undertake their planning meetings. So this, in their first planning meeting, that's where they will discuss their support, their funding needs, and then also we will help them to understand what has been funded in their NDIS plan. However, when we're helping people to understand what's been funded in their NDIS plan, how do we know what is the responsibility of the NDIS to fund, and how do we know what is the responsibility of the health system to fund? So in the beginning of the presentation, I used the word mainstream. So mainstream interface refers to the other government systems available to all Australians, and each other government system has different responsibilities. But in the context of the NDIA and health, it's how the NDIA and health can support a person together. So in November 2015, the Council of Australian Governments, or COAG, published the updated principles to determine the responsibilities of the NDIS and other service systems. So these principles cover 11 interface areas like justice and aged care, employment, education, and health is one of those areas. However, what does the COAG agreement actually look like in practical terms? So this table here is some examples of what that looks like in practical terms. So in terms of what mainstream or health might be, the responsibility of the health system, is things like diagnosis and assessment of health conditions, clinical treatment and supports, subacute care such as palliative care or geriatric evaluation, and post-acute care such as surgery recovery, rehabilitation, and this next one is really important because general hearing, vision and podiatry services where it's unrelated to the person's disability. It also includes preventative health, private health insurance fees and medical costs such as gap fees, doctors or medications. And then we come over to what the NDIS can typically fund. So it's things like assistance to coordinate supports, including decision-making and making appointments, assistance with daily activities, including communication needs or challenging behaviours when accessing health services, prosthetic limbs, orthotics or splints that are required for long-term use, community reintegration needs such as personal support or home modifications, training of NDIS-funded support staff, and assistance with transport to medical appointments when no alternative exists. Those supports were just a snapshot of the supports that the NDIS can actually provide. Other supports might be things like vehicle modifications, support in the community, or employment. However, as I mentioned, what happens if a person is not actually eligible to access the NDIS and access those supports? As an LAC partner, we're able to provide support to individuals, or we're able to provide support to community for people to access. I spoke a little bit about the role of an LAC in terms of helping people understand and access the NDIS, and also what happens if a person becomes a participant of the scheme. But this is the other aspect of the LAC role. And this is where, if a person is not eligible for the NDIS, this is the type of support that we can provide them. So the first part is what we call ILC, or Information Linkages and Capacity Building, and that is my particular role. And that's individual support that we can provide to a person to refer them to other services that might be available in their community. And we do that by staying really closely connected to our community, and we have a really good grassroots knowledge of what's available to support a person. The other part of that is community capacity building. So LAC partners in the community also work with the wider community, business and government sectors. We do this because we want to build their understanding of disability and assist them to develop practices and programs that support the inclusion of people with disability in the social and economic life of their communities. Carers Queensland is actually working on 13 community capacity building projects, which are really awesome, including a lot of them for people to access who aren't participants in the scheme. And I'll share with you in the next slide how to actually find out more about those programs. So, Carers Queensland is a local area coordination partner in the community for these above regions. Unfortunately, you can't actually see the website that was on the slide. I apologise for that. However, if you would like to find out where your local area is and your local office is, you can call that inquiries line. If you'd like to find out events that we are holding in the community for both participants and also participants who aren't people who aren't participants of the scheme, you can call this number. And also, if you would like to receive some individual support to talk about access to the NDIS as well, you can call this number and actually speak to a local area coordinator about whether you might be able to receive some help to have a look at that eligibility criteria and have a look at your documentation as well and provide you some advice and support. Throughout the presentation, I also spoke about booklets 1 and booklets 3. So booklets 1, 2 and 3 are NDIA resources, and they represent a participant's journey through the NDIS. So booklet 1 is understanding the NDIS, and again it contains that checklist I spoke about very early on. It talks about the basic eligibility criteria. The other good thing that it also talks about is the responsibilities of the mainstream systems versus NDIS. Booklets 2 and 3 are specifically for NDIS participants. Booklet 2 planning helps NDIS participants plan for their first or subsequent planning meetings. And then booklet 3, using your NDIS plan, supports NDIS participants to understand what's been funded in their plan and how they can use those funds. These booklets are available on the NDIS website. You can download them. They're available in several other languages and also easy English. However, if you would actually like a paper copy, you could call the Carers Queensland inquiries line and we could look at having a paper copy sent out to you. If you still had some more questions that you would prefer to have answered by a representative of the NDIA, you can actually do so by calling the 1800 800 110 number and speak to somebody from the National Contact Centre. Or you can also chat to somebody from the National Contact Centre via web chat. It's also available for people who have speech or hearing loss, or if somebody needs it in a language other than English. If you do also have any other general questions and you'd like to speak to Carers Queensland, you can call the Carers Queensland number, and I'll flick back so you can see it and write it down. And that number is 1300 999 636. Thank you all for bearing with me today. I know I spoke about a lot of different acronyms. And yeah, the acronyms are, yeah, you do learn them. You definitely do. But yeah, thank you very much for all of your time today. I encourage you, please connect with us if you'd like some support around the NDIS, and thank you very much for your time.